Welcome to Ask the Security Guy. I'm Holly Magnuson. Sorry we were a little late getting started, but technology, there's technical difficulties that's just a part of life. So welcome to episode number 63, but more importantly, this is episode 1 of our 7th year of Shawn and I doing Ask the Security Guy. So congratulations, Shawn. We may have just hit another technical.
Thank you. Yeah.
There you.
I mean,
Well, Shawn's audio had been working.
It's a good thing we're
beautifully.
run out of
Yeah, technology. So we may or may not hear Shawn. It was working perfectly in the pre-show, but we'll see what happens. If you have questions during this broadcast, feel free to use the chat, ask us questions. If you have questions after the fact, you can always email us at iso@apu.edu, and we will do our best to answer your questions. So we have with us here again today, Shawn Corman, of course. He is our security architect and deputy chief security officer. And I always have to read these credentials, but he has his CPT, the CISSP, and my personal favorite, the certified ethical hacker. Also, we have with us today, Valerie Floyd-Davis. Valerie is our interim emergency response coordinator for COVID-19. She, as a secondment, it's a hard word for me to say, from our School of Nursing as the director of recruitment. She's in the process of completing a master's degree of cybersecurity strategy and information management at George Washington University, as well as a PhD in criminal justice, homeland security policy and coordination at Walden University. Right now, her dissertation, the working title is Malicious versus Malevolent Cyber Attackers. And there's a big long thing there. I'll put it in the show notes because it's huge, but it's very exciting. I'm actually looking forward to reading that. And then also with us is Leslie Wickman, who is our assistant to our president. Leslie has a master's degree in astroengineering and a doctoral degree in human factors and biomechanics from Stanford University. She's also a published author and is currently involved with research on climate change impacts to national security. Welcome, ladies. It's great to have you here as we kick off season 7.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.
As our tradition in Ask the Security Guy, we like to go back and take a look at the previous year. And so hopefully Shawn's audio is going to work well. And Shawn, you can kind of talk. I can hear you. Talk us through some of what we saw in 2020 in the way of cyber security issues.
So 2020 was a really fascinating year. We had the oldie but goodie with ransomware. And frankly, ransomware still steals the show. But this year being an election year, we also saw all kinds of new things with social media and other forums online and different types of social engineering coming to bear. So yeah, it's really been a fascinating year. And we're very curious to see what 21 looks like.
I think in so many ways, we're looking forward to what 2021 looks like. I want to start with Leslie and talk a little bit about, in October, if you haven't watched the October episode of Ask the Security Guy, please do. It was fascinating. And so, Leslie, why don't you go ahead and kind of give us an update and kind of talk to us a little bit more about what's going on in the Arctic.
Okay. Well, maybe I should give a little bit more background first in terms of the work that I've been doing. It includes kind of a survey of various national security issues that will be impacted and are being impacted by climate change. And these are things all the way from, warming air and ocean temperatures to sea level rise, to melting of polar ice. All these things have an impact to many of us. And, some of the things that are probably painfully close to home for us here in California are things like the increased number of wildfires that we're having. Anybody notice that this year? And, the other thing is just in the last year, the sea temperatures globally increased significantly. They've been increasing over the last several decades. And one of the things that people might not think about is the fact that heat is energy. And so with the increased amount of heat energy in both the atmosphere as well as in the oceans, there's more energy available for violent storms. And so we've seen this last year a huge number of hurricanes and severe storms. And it's easy sometimes for people to get confused between weather and climate. Okay, so I mean, when I first started doing research on climate change and national security, people would say, oh, we had the coldest winter we ever had in Boston, let's just say, this past year. Well, it's not about one season. Mm-hmm. It's about averages over time and what's happening over time. And so, again, like I said, this increase in violent storms, severe storms, and their impacts. The increased number of wildfires that we're experiencing, the melting in the Arctic, as well as glacial snowpacks around the world, sea level rise, another impact to national security in terms of bases that are located at low sea levels. There's a lot of military bases around the world that are located close to the waterfront for good reason. Obviously, Valerie knows very well in terms of her time in the Navy. Navy bases, Marine bases, many times are right close to the water. And so that's a huge impact. Another thing is just with these severe storms and flooding, I mean, we've experienced our share of them in the U.S., especially, in the Gulf Coast and whatnot. And, who is it that responds to these national as well as international disasters? Well, oftentimes it's the U.S. military, whether it's at home or abroad. And so these are all major impacts to national security and our capability to respond to threats. So if we drill down into what's going on in the Arctic, which is the area that I've focused on primarily because of the fact that the Arctic melting is something that's drastically impacting the amount of ice that we have in the Arctic in real time, and it has been for the last couple of decades now. There was actually big news in the Arctic world that just came out yesterday, but is happening as we speak. And that is that we have a Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard icebreaker that is going to be leaving Seattle, or may have left, but it was today actually, that it was leaving Seattle, heading north for the winter. Typically, nobody heads north for the winter. There's a great deal of ice up there. And so this is actually the first time since 1982 that the U.S. has had a Coast Guard breaker head north for the winter. So this is going to be really interesting. And it also points up a capability issue for the U.S. in the Arctic. With the ice melting, the whole region is becoming much more accessible. Mm-hmm. And there are actually thousands of ships that operate in the Arctic. And the U.S. has relatively little capability up there compared to some of our neighbors in the Arctic, shall we say. And so this Polar Star Coast Guard icebreaker that's going up there is, it was commissioned in 1976. So that makes it 44 years old. Okay. We have one other polar class icebreaker in our fleet right now, and that's the Healy, which has been in and out of commission. and it's about 20 years old, or maybe even more than that. And so we have these two kind of old and ailing polar class icebreakers in our fleet, whereas on the Russian side, they have mini, and they have nuclear powered icebreakers that go through the Arctic ice like it was nothing, convoying a fleet of ships behind them. They have a string of Arctic ports along their shore in the Arctic. They have, for back since the 60s, they've got communication satellites that are over that region. They've got just tremendous capability to operate effectively in the Arctic. And this melting of the Arctic ice is effectively exposing a third continental coastline to North America, including one that borders both the US and Canada. So these are things that are up close and personal, even though, you know, we Americans here in the lower 48 kind of think of ourselves as being isolated from the Arctic. We have Alaska, right? And the fact that the ice is melting and the Northwest Passage has opened up during the summertime for the first time in human history, essentially, is very significant.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's kind of sad that our ice-breaking vessels are so out of date. Valerie or Shawn, do you have any questions or that you want to ask Leslie about this? Because I could ask all kinds of questions, but I want to also get to see the other things we want to talk about today.
Sure. So one of the key areas that that I know Valerie and I both share an interest in is critical infrastructure and cyber terrorism. And I'm wondering how the changes in the Arctic either raise or change risks to critical infrastructure and cyber terrorism.
Well, with regard to critical infrastructure, and I forgot to mention, we do have on the U.S. side, we have a new polar class icebreaker that's been commissioned and is supposed to be, depending on funding, available in 2024. So that is coming, but that's one new ship. But with regard to more of maybe what we think of as commonly accessed infrastructure, things like internet capability. Right now, we have very little capability that extends above about 70 degrees north via any satellite communications. We've been, over the decades, relying on satellites in geosynchronous orbit, which are in equatorial orbits, and they only reach consistently about to 70 degrees north and 70 degrees south. So once you go above that, which of course, essentially all the Arctic is, you start losing signal very rapidly. And in fact, the ports and the small settlements in northern Canada and northern Alaska have very little coverage in terms of internet. Especially, there have been times when some of those northern villages have lost internet capability altogether. And these, of course, are on the shore of the Arctic when one geo satellite goes out. So they'll be without internet until the satellite gets restored. So, but one of the things that's happening now is we've got these commercial companies that are planning large constellations of low Earth orbit satellites that will crisscross the entire globe. They'll be in low Earth orbits and have about a 90-minute orbital period. So every 90 minutes they go over roughly the same spot on the Earth. And so Amazon is working on a constellation. Google's working on a constellation. SpaceX is working on a constellation. And so there will be commercially available internet communications capability once those constellations get in place. And the military may be able to lease services through some of these commercially available constellations. So that problem is being solved, and we will have greater infrastructure in that region within the coming years. But so that's one issue. Another, it has to do with our ability to get good real-time surveillance for that region, both in terms of ships that are operating in that area, as well as the ice itself. And as there are more ships operating in that area, as the ice melts, we're going to have icebergs breaking loose. And so one of the things we talked about last time, I think, was the fact that there are a lot of cruise ships who want to capitalize on the idea that, hey, Northwest Passage is open, let's take some tourists up there. And and then you can easily, your mind goes to, or at least my mind goes to the Titanic, right? You've got a cruise ship up there with a whole bunch of, civilian tourists, and you hit an iceberg because the ice is melting and you can't really predict when and where the icebergs are going to show up. And then we have, like I said before, our Coast Guard has very little capability up there. And even the Polar Star voyage that's coming up, I mean, they've basically said, if we have a problem, we're going to have to call on other nations to come to our rescue because we simply don't have backup. We don't have the capability to operate effectively, even for a search and rescue mission. So anyway, it's a dire circumstance.
Yeah, and we did have a question come in that I think is going to help segue into some of the, because the question is, let me see if I can show the question, elaborating more on how the climate change, correlates with cybersecurity. So I think, Shawn, how do you want to direct this? So, and head and kind of start having Valerie talk some about the infrastructure, or?
Yeah, so I wonder if you could start speaking to that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think what in the conversations that Shawn and I have had over the last, few months, longer than that actually, is about the method and the opportunity and the motives of people who are hackers, cyber attackers, who look for that opportunity to see if they can conquer the world, right? It sounds so dark and kind of like a sci-fi film, but it really does happen. And if I can go back in time, I know we talked about this, the cybersecurity world and hacking and insider access really became popular with Edward Snowden. And that was only, within the last 7 years. But if you go back to 1983, if you have not watched the movie War Games, you need to watch it now because it's very relevant to what we've seen happening in our world today. And so War Games was basically, a couple of kids who one of the kids was a cyber hacker. And so he wanted to see what he could get into. Originally it was, let's change my grade. And it turned into that he hacked into the Department of Defense and was able to control some of the military defense structures through weapons, etc. But the ultimate part of it was it became a game between the computer and the hacker. And he had control over the whole thing. Now, what's so important about this movie is that in 1983, when it was released, President Ronald Reagan was at Camp David and was actually seeing that movie. It was premiered to him there. And he came out of that movie so, it's funny because some people quote him as being freaked out, extremely concerned about the fact, could this happen to us in real time? And, oftentimes we look at movies and we go, well, great, thanks for giving the hackers an idea, or thanks for giving, an active shooter an idea, or a terrorist. And that's what President Reagan had the vision to increase cybersecurity, look at his defense platforms and say, where do we have gaps and what needs to be addressed? So even though the generation now really looks at the Edward Snowden leak and the Brandon Manning, or now Chelsea Manning leaks as, oh, now we know this goes on. This actually goes back to 1983 when the public really started to say, hey, is this possible? And I think what our conversation has been, Shawn, is that, you know, it's not a sci-fi movie. This is real. This can happen. It's not your kid with his black hoodie on in his basement, you know, this ominous person. I mean, these people who want to affect our critical infrastructure could be the woman at Starbucks that you're sitting next to on your laptop. I mean, you just don't know. And I think that's what the public, I think we have to bring an education to the public that just like you prepare for emergencies, like a earthquake, a flood, a fire, etc., you have to prepare for a cybersecurity attack on our infrastructure.
Yep. Well, really, I mean, you're talking about a similar impact to a fire or an earthquake or a flood. Several years ago, there was a study done on several metropolitan areas that looked at if the power grid were taken down for 24 hours, 48 hours, or more, what would happen in that metropolitan area? So some of the more generous interpretations of that said, well, you know, 24 to 36 hours, things are pretty much status quo. After that, you know, you're seeing signs of unrest. On the other end of the spectrum, people were saying in less than 10 hours, you have anarchy. So to tie that back, though, one of the risks that I see and that I'm concerned about is tying in looking at the change in the Arctic, the communications gap, the influx of commercial satellites into that area. There's a question about national security and national communications tied through commercial applications. So, you know, so again, you know, there's a case to be made, I think, for where a change in our climate can have a direct potential impact to our overall national security, but at an infrastructure level.
Can I make a comment, Shawn? I don't want to talk over you. I just want to make sure. Oh, okay. So interesting, and this ties into the climate change, is that when you look at border transportation security, because of all of the focus on our southern border for all the reasons that we're aware of, you know, the Border Patrol, the majority of the Border Patrol is all at the southern border. Approximately 20% is up at the northern border at any particular time, very little on the east or the west borders. But one of the things you see in border transportation security, and I told Holly about this one day, I think I told you as well, there's actually a picture of a crosswalk at the Canadian border that has these beautiful planters with flowers and a crosswalk, and people just walk right in from Canada into the United States or vice versa. And it's just open. Now, what's interesting about the northern border is that because of the topography and the weather, a lot of times you find, and I'll speak from my classes, I teach a border transportation security class and I teach a managing information security class. And many times my students, and they're military veterans or active and reserve, so these are people that are aware, they're out and about in the world, working at bases. And I said to them, so what do you think, which border do you think is our biggest threat right now? And all of them, for the most part, said the southern border, with the exception of a couple who said the northern border. But they didn't know why they said the northern border. I think they could tell my face. Maybe they read my face. Hey, that probably wasn't the right answer. And they said, oh, you know, it's the snow. It's too hard to get in. I said, no, it's the perfect place to enter, because we don't have as many officers up there patrolling that area. The climate change is obviously decreasing the snowpack. You know, we're seeing all sorts of areas where the opportunity exists there. And I think also with our attention at the southern border, it really distracts attention from the northern border, which makes it a perfect area for cybersecurity hackers to either come in physically, they can implant themselves within the community up there, or obviously terrorists just in general. There's a lot of cells that are up in the northern border, and it's because the attention and our distraction is elsewhere. And now with this study that Dr. Wickman's doing, and with climate change, I mean, this is just one more indication that we have got to change our thinking and look at the northern border as big of a threat as the southern border. You mentioned about the critical infrastructure going down. I recently did a case study on a cyber attack that affected a critical infrastructure. And what's really interesting, and you brought it up, Shawn, is that the time it takes to cause complete havoc is so short that people don't even realize the threat that lies ahead of them. Think about here, we're in California. It's warm. You could probably survive outside for a limited amount of time without thinking about freezing to death, really, in a snow-packed area, right? And or sub-zero freezing. So this case study I did really walked through the day-to-day activities of what happens when critical infrastructure goes down. Think about nursing homes without power, without heat, without availability to medical supplies, hospitals. It's not like here in LA where we saw with the COVID tents being set up, they could be outside during the summer, right? They're not going to be at risk of freezing, maybe hot, but, there's a way to bring in some airflow or, fans, etc. But it's a whole different ballgame up in the northern area. And so throughout this exercise, and this went on for about 11 weeks of this case study, it was frightening because you've got public works people that can't get to the areas where they need to make repairs. Let's say if there's something that they can go to set up a generator for a nursing home, or you've got people that are stranded on the highways. I mean, it is really scary. And, I think Dr. Wickman and I share the feeling, some people, when they hear this stuff, they think we're being paranoid, but it is the reality of what we're dealing with right now.
Well, and if I can just piggyback onto that, and when you mentioned the 20% of our resources patrolling the northern border, we're talking basically the border between Canada and the lower 48. We're not even talking about how diminished the resources are in the Arctic, right? And, and I think people forget about the fact that, our neighbor across the Arctic is Russia. And, they do exercises in the Arctic very frequently. And not only with the surface ships and planes, but also with submarines. And, the idea of open water in the Arctic and being able to bring a submarine up close to the northern shore of North America, be it Canada or Alaska, doesn't matter too much. Canada relies heavily on the U.S. for our allied status. And, with diminished resources and very little capability to do border patrol in that region, it is a real risk.
Mm-hmm.
So as we've talked about this and the potential risk, what should we do to be prepared if critical infrastructure was attacked?
Valerie, why don't you jump in on that?
You can see my eyes going, oh boy. My colleagues laugh at me because I'm constantly saying, if you don't have an emergency go bag in your car, at work, and at home, then you are not prepared. If you cannot, so if we talk just for a second about something that's very easy to do, right? You can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you can purchase an emergency bag for very little money. You can purchase one that's $100 and it can last 5 to 7 days, which really is what you should be looking for. The 3-day rule is no longer applicable. You're going to start seeing FEMA starting to change their language to say 5 days minimum, 7 days is really what you should be thinking of. Even 14 days would be optimal. 14 days would be optimal. And the reason why I say this is that because resources are limited in an emergency, in a disaster, right? A catastrophic disaster, if we need outside help, it's not an emergency, it's a disaster. We have to be able to fend for ourselves, if you will, for enough time until we do have the resources. And the resources might come from other countries, other states. Now, if we're talking about a critical infrastructure attack, I always foresee, driving 80 miles or 70 miles on the freeway, or intersection lights all of a sudden going down. Think about our side streets, all the streets that we take every day. Imagine if all of a sudden the power goes down and everybody's driving. Okay, that is what keeps me up at night, because it's awareness. We have to become more aware. So get your bag, right? Make sure your family knows what to do in an emergency or a disaster, but also start taking some steps that will enable you to be more secure. Like don't give people your passwords to your computer. Don't let your kids' friends come in and play on the computer games and your laptop's open with possibly financial information. Who knows what else they're looking at on there. We have to start understanding that the cyber attacker is not that kid in the hoodie in the basement. That is not who we're up against. We're up against adversaries, enemy nation states, lone wolves, and that is very different from what we have known. And I think that the sooner we accept as a society that there are people that want to do grave harm to our country and make us completely in fear and chaos, panic, that the sooner we'll be able to start thinking and working smarter as far as finding real solutions, simple things, triple authentications on logging into your computer, your cell phones. Don't be walking around with the Wi-Fi open, looking for an open Wi-Fi that you don't know who's going to crawl into your Wi-Fi, right? So there's some simple steps. There's some simple steps that actually don't cost much money. It's just more of education and training. And I think that's what we have to do. And we have to accept the fact that there are people that want to do us grave harm as a country.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, this is something that Shawn and I have been talking about with regard to APU's security policy and requiring multi-factor authentication for the entire community, requiring annual security training for employees and students. Just the awareness, honestly, raising awareness, as with so many issues, is your first line of defense, and so helping people to stay informed is super important.
Shawn.
So, and I think you both nailed a key point there. Technology is not the end all be. People are. An aware person dealing with physical threats, dealing with cyber threats, dealing with any kind of threat. Someone who's aware and cognizant and prepared is ready, and they're our first line of defense. And they're their own first line of defense, so they're ready. So that, helping with awareness, helping people understand what the threats are, helping them understand what basic steps to take to be prepared and to, what not to click on. All of those things put us in a much better position.
Yes.
And I think also that, it's the Internet of Things, right? IoT. Our phone is connected to our Ring doorbell. You can turn on your thermostat now from your phone. So when I talk about the cell phone, as you're moving about your day, it's really not a phone anymore. It is a smart device, right? And so what I try to explain to even my family is that you have to start thinking out of the box. You really do. Cybersecurity is not in a box. It's out so big. Remember, we don't own the internet. right? It's global. And I try to tell people when I work with them, look, and my students, it's stop thinking it's the United States, because there is that common thought that the internet is the United States. And I think once that is explained, I think that brings a little bit more awareness to the fact that that makes us vulnerable to the threats of other countries because we don't own it ourselves. And there's small steps you can take to start doing our part. So this is a basic emergency management 101. You take care of yourself so that you can take care of your family, so that you can take care of your community. We have a critical incident response team here at the university. And this is something we've been working through with tabletop exercises, is that if we individually are not prepared to take care of us, we can't then help our family, and we can't help this community here at APU, as an example. And so it does start with us, and it's those little steps, I won't even get into TikTok, but that's a whole nother story.
We have a time limit.
Yes, that's right. It's like you have to know when you download apps on your phone, you really need to know what is the foundation of that app. Who is backing that app? Mm-hmm. Do people know WhatsApp is Russian? Do they know that TikTok started in China? I mean, these are things that and what are they after? It's access, it's opportunity. Mm-hmm. So don't get me started.
Yeah. Yes, we're going to, kind of keep this under control because we can get together again. As Shawn, talked about, we are our own first line of defense in protecting ourselves, our community. In fact, someone sent in a ticket to the support center asking, what are we doing to stop this influx of phishing that we have seen this last month? And, I'm working at crafting a reply that basically says we have to be smarter than what we're being. People are clicking on these links. And if you're part of the APU community, I'm just going to say this right now, we are not freezing, deactivating, or deleting your accounts. That doesn't know. And if you have questions about it, please don't click the link. Call our support center. But one of the things that I'm very excited about is kicking off some new security training. And one of the things that will be happening is on, I believe it's the third Wednesday of the month. I'm going to be hosting a watch party. And hopefully, I've not done this technology before yet in our things, but hopefully this is going to work. This is a trailer it's called Restricted Intelligence. And if you ever watched The Office and kind of the fun and games there, you'll kind of get that vibe. So let's hope and pray that this works like it's supposed to.
This office has a leak. Have you guys seen a blue USB key?
Oh, is it a blue one?
Yes.
No.
Chloe, I can't log in.
No!
They've hacked his account. They're reading his emails.
It would be bad for morale if I was to leave my iPad in the taxi.
I think you're an idiot. How would you even get in?
I've got a friend to rescue. Muppets.
You all need strong passwords.
Not if you've got a taser.
Hey, the technology worked. Yay. But this restricted intelligence, the videos are all about 4 to 5 minutes long, but they deal with different topics that we will see and face as we do our own work. And it puts it in a nice, fun way. So watch for that information coming out. If you're excited and you want to know more about it sooner, you can always email me if I can find the right one. You can email us at iso@apu.edu. With that, final thoughts. Leslie, any final thoughts?
Well, we covered a lot of ground, but yeah, I think, again, the most important advice that I can give to our audience is to stay informed. be that first line of defense, right?
Yes.
And the more you know, the better you can protect yourself and your organization and even the country.
Valerie, final thoughts?
Same as Dr. Wickman talked about, and my comment would be time is of the essence. We don't have months or weeks to figure out what we're doing with our cybersecurity. We need to do it now.
Shawn.
You're both on target. You're your own best line of defense. So be educated, learn what's out there, and be smarter than the bear.
Yep. So thank you all. Hang on, and I will say goodbye. Again, you can always email us if you've got questions at iso@apu.edu, and we will get back to you as quickly as possible. And with that, have a wonderful Christmas holiday, and we'll see you in 2021.